The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine gardens of Kensington Palace as Prince Alexander stood at the tall windows of the nursery, watching the world wake up beyond the iron gates. In his arms, wrapped in the softest cashmere blanket that had been a gift from his grandmother, lay his newborn daughter. She was just 3 days old, her tiny fingers curled around his thumb with a grip that seemed to hold all the promise of the future. Princess Victoria emerged from the adjoining bathroom, her auburn hair still damp from the shower, wearing a simple cream-colored dress that somehow managed to look both elegant and comfortable. Despite having given birth just days ago, she moved with the grace that had first caught Alexander's attention during a charity gala 5 years earlier. She wasn't born into royalty, but she had embraced her role with a warmth and authenticity that had won over even the most skeptical members of the British public. "The photographers will be here in 2 hours," Victoria said softly, settling into the rocking chair beside the window. "Are you ready for this?" Alexander turned from the window, his dark eyes reflecting a mixture of pride and protective concern. At 34, he had spent his entire life in the public eye, but this felt different. This wasn't about him anymore. This was about introducing his daughter to a world that would watch her every move, analyze her every gesture, and have opinions about her before she could even form her own. "I've been thinking about what we discussed last night," he said, carefully transferring their daughter to Victoria's arms. "About her name. About what it means." Victoria looked down at their baby, whose eyes were just beginning to flutter open. They were the same deep blue as Alexander's, with thick, dark lashes that would one day be the envy of countless admirers. "She's perfect, isn't she? So small, so innocent. It's hard to believe that in a few hours, the whole world will know about her." The couple had spent months debating what to name their child. Royal names carried weight, history, and expectations. They honored ancestors, reflected values, and often revealed the aspirations parents held for their children. But Alexander and Victoria wanted something more than tradition. They wanted a name that would tell the story of who their daughter might become, not just who she was expected to be. "I keep thinking about your grandmother," Victoria continued, gently stroking the baby's soft cheek. "About how she changed things, how she wasn't afraid to be different." Alexander's grandmother, Queen Elena, had been a formidable woman who had modernized the monarchy during her 40-year reign. She had opened the palace doors to people from all walks of life, championed causes that others thought too controversial, and had always insisted that royalty was about service, not privilege. She had passed away just 6 months before their daughter's birth, and both Alexander and Victoria felt her absence keenly during this momentous time. "She would have loved this little one," Alexander said, settling into the chair beside Victoria. "She always said that each new generation was a chance to do better, to be better." Outside, they could hear the distant hum of activity as palace staff prepared for the day ahead. The press office had been fielding calls for weeks, with journalists from around the world eager for any detail about the royal baby. Social media was buzzing with speculation about everything from her name to her first public appearance. The betting odds in London had created a frenzy of their own, with traditional names like Elizabeth, Charlotte, and Diana leading the pack. But Alexander and Victoria had chosen something unexpected, something that reflected not just their heritage but their hopes for their daughter's future. They had selected a name that honored the past while embracing the present, one that would surprise everyone and yet feel absolutely perfect once it was revealed. "The speech is ready," Alexander said, pulling a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket. He had written and rewritten it dozens of times, trying to capture exactly what this moment meant to them. "But I keep wondering if words can really express how this feels." Victoria smiled, the kind of radiant expression that had graced magazine covers and made her one of the most photographed women in the world. "I think people will understand. Being a parent is universal, isn't it? Rich or poor, royal or common, we all want the same things for our children." The baby stirred in Victoria's arms, making the soft cooing sounds that had already become the soundtrack of their lives. In just 3 days, she had transformed everything. The palace, usually a place of formal protocols and centuries-old traditions, now felt like a home. Staff members found excuses to walk past the nursery, hoping for a glimpse of the newest member of the royal family. Even the most stern-faced security guards had been caught smiling when they heard her gentle cries echoing through the corridors. "Do you think we're making the right choice?" Victoria asked, a hint of uncertainty creeping into her voice. "With her name, I mean. It's so important to get it right." Alexander reached over and took her hand, the simple wedding band on his finger catching the morning light. "I think we're making the only choice we could. It's honest. It's authentic. It's us." The name they had chosen was Luna Isabella Grace. Luna, meaning moon, represented the light that guides through darkness, the constant presence that influences tides and time itself. Isabella honored Alexander's great-great-grandmother, a queen who had been beloved for her kindness and her commitment to education and women's rights. Grace was for Victoria's mother, a teacher who had passed away when Victoria was just 17, but whose influence had shaped every decision Victoria had made since. Luna Isabella Grace. It was a name that sang when spoken aloud, that felt both modern and timeless, that carried the weight of history while pointing toward the future. It was a name that would look beautiful on formal documents and sound natural on a playground. Most importantly, it was a name that reflected who they hoped their daughter would become, someone who could light the way for others, who honored those who came before while carving her own path. "The car will be here soon to take us to the hospital for the photographs," Alexander said, checking his watch. Royal tradition dictated that the first official photos be taken on the hospital steps, just as they had been for generations of royal babies before her. The images would be transmitted around the world within minutes, analyzed and celebrated and criticized in equal measure. Victoria stood carefully, still recovering from the birth, but determined to present herself with the dignity expected of her position. "I should get ready. Will you hold her while I change?" Alexander took Luna back into his arms, marveling again at how something so small could feel so monumentally important. She had his mother's nose and Victoria's chin, and when she opened her eyes, she seemed to look at him with an intensity that made him believe she already understood the significance of the day ahead. As Victoria disappeared into the dressing room, Alexander began to speak softly to his daughter, sharing the thoughts and promises that had been building in his heart since the moment she was born. "Today the world meets you, little Luna," he whispered. "And I promise you this. We will protect your childhood as much as we can. We will teach you that being royal isn't about crowns or castles, but about using whatever advantages you have to help others. We will make sure you know that you are loved not because of your title, but because of who you are." The baby's eyes seemed to focus on his face, and Alexander felt a surge of emotion so powerful it took his breath away. This was love in its purest form, uncomplicated by politics or protocol or public opinion. This was the feeling that would sustain them through whatever challenges lay ahead. A gentle knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. "Your Royal Highness," came the voice of Margaret, the palace's head of communications. "The cars are ready whenever you are." 5 more minutes, Alexander called back, not ready to break the spell of this quiet moment with his daughter. But the world was waiting, and duty called. In just a few hours, Luna Isabella Grace would have her first official photograph taken. Her name would be announced to the global press, and her journey as a public figure would begin. It was a heavy responsibility for someone so small, but Alexander and Victoria were determined to handle it with the grace and wisdom that their daughter's name represented. The morning light continued to stream through the nursery windows, bathing everything in a golden glow that seemed to promise that this day, this moment, this introduction of their precious daughter to the world would be the beginning of something beautiful and transformative for everyone involved. Part 2. The journey from Kensington Palace to St. Mary's Hospital in Paddington usually took 20 minutes, but today it felt like both an eternity and an instant. Princess Victoria sat in the back of the royal car, Luna cradled against her chest, watching the familiar streets of London pass by through tinted windows. Crowds had already begun to gather along the route, people holding flowers and handmade signs welcoming the newest royal baby. "Look at them," Victoria murmured to Alexander, who sat beside her, one protective hand resting on their daughter's back. "They're so excited to meet her." The enthusiasm of the public had been overwhelming from the moment news of Luna's birth had been announced 3 days earlier. The palace had issued a simple statement. Their Royal Highnesses Prince Alexander and Princess Victoria are delighted to announce the birth of their daughter, born at 6:47 a.m. on Tuesday, October 15th. The princess weighed 7 pounds, 2 ounces. Both mother and baby are doing well. That brief announcement had generated more media coverage than most international news events. Social media had exploded with congratulations and speculation. #RoyalBaby had trended worldwide for 72 straight hours. Betting shops across the United Kingdom had taken millions of pounds in wagers on everything from the baby's name to the color of Victoria's dress for the first public appearance. The official royal family social media accounts had gained over 1 million new followers in just 3 days. But for Alexander and Victoria, the public celebration felt surreal compared to the intimate reality of caring for their newborn. They had spent the last 3 days in a blissful bubble of feeding schedules and diaper changes, marveling at every tiny expression and movement their daughter made. Now, as they approached the hospital where the formal photograph would be taken, they were about to share that precious intimacy with the entire world. "Are you nervous?" Alexander asked, adjusting the small diamond earrings that had been a christening gift from Queen Elena years ago. "Terrified," Victoria admitted with a laugh. "Not about the photographs, but about everything else. About raising her in this fishbowl we live in. About making sure she has a normal childhood despite all of this." The car turned into the hospital's private entrance, where security personnel had already cordoned off the area. Through the windows, they could see the massive crowd of photographers and journalists that had been gathering since dawn. Telephoto lenses and microphones created a forest of technology, all aimed at capturing this single moment. Margaret, the head of communications, spoke into her earpiece from the front seat. "We're here. Is everyone in position?" She turned to address the royal couple. "Remember, we'll do this exactly as we rehearsed. The photographs first, then Prince Alexander will make the announcement about the name, and then we'll take a few questions. The whole thing shouldn't take more than 15 minutes. 15 minutes to introduce their daughter to the world." It seemed both impossibly brief and overwhelmingly long. As the car came to a complete stop, Alexander took a deep breath. "Whatever happens out there, we do this together, all right? We present a united front. We protect her, and we remember why we're doing this." "Why are we doing this?" Victoria asked, though she knew the answer. Sometimes it helped to say it aloud. "Because she's ours, because we love her, and because the people who will support her throughout her life deserve to meet her properly," Alexander replied. "And because tradition matters, even when we're going to change it." The car door opened, and instantly the sound of clicking cameras and shouted questions filled the air. Alexander stepped out first, then turned to help Victoria, who held Luna with practiced ease. The baby was wrapped in the same white christening gown that had been worn by royal babies for over a century. But the modern car seat and contemporary styling of Victoria's powder blue dress created a perfect blend of old and new. The crowd of photographers was larger than either of them had expected. International news organizations had sent their best royal correspondents, and the usually reserved British press pool was buzzing with excitement. Camera flashes created a strobe effect in the afternoon sunshine, and the cacophony of voices calling their names was almost overwhelming. But Luna, remarkably, seemed completely unbothered by the chaos. Her eyes were wide open, taking in the new environment with the curious expression that had already become familiar to her parents. She didn't cry or fuss, but instead appeared genuinely interested in the spectacle surrounding her. "She's a natural," Alexander said under his breath as they walked toward the designated spot where the official photographs would be taken. "Look at her. She's not scared at all." Victoria smiled, her nervousness beginning to fade as she realized that Luna was handling the situation better than either of her parents. Maybe she understands that this is just part of who she is. Maybe she was born ready for this. The formal photographs took exactly 7 minutes. Victoria and Alexander posed together, then separately, then with Luna positioned so that her face was clearly visible to the cameras. The baby's expression remained alert and interested throughout, occasionally moving her tiny hands in ways that made the photographers call out appreciatively. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Alexander stepped forward to the cluster of microphones that had been set up at the designated spot. The crowd of journalists fell silent, understanding that they were about to learn the name that had been the subject of intense speculation for months. Victoria and I are absolutely thrilled to introduce our daughter to all of you today, Alexander began, his voice carrying clearly across the hospital courtyard. She has already brought more joy to our lives than we ever thought possible, and we are grateful beyond words to be her parents. He paused, glancing back at Victoria, who nodded encouragingly. Luna was still nestled in her arms, her dark eyes seeming to look directly at the cameras with remarkable composure. We are pleased to announce that our daughter's name is Luna Isabella Grace, Alexander continued. Luna for the light that guides us through darkness. Isabella to honor my great-great-grandmother Queen Isabella, who championed education and women's rights, and Grace for Victoria's mother, whose memory continues to inspire us both. The reaction from the press was immediate and enthusiastic. Luna was not a name that had appeared on any of the betting boards or speculation lists. It was unexpected, modern, and beautiful, while still carrying the historical weight expected of a royal name. Several journalists immediately began typing on their phones, rushing to be the first to report the announcement to their news organizations. Luna Isabella Grace, one reporter called out. Can you tell us what that name means to you personally? Victoria stepped forward, her confidence growing as she spoke about something so close to her heart. Luna represents hope and constancy, she said. The moon is always there, even when we can't see it, providing light and guidance. We hope our daughter will be a source of light for others, just as she has already illuminated our lives. And the name has international appeal, Alexander added. Luna means moon in Spanish, Italian, and several other languages. We live in a global world, and we wanted a name that would resonate across cultures while still honoring our own traditions. Another journalist raised her hand. Your Royal Highness, can you tell us how Queen Elena influenced your choice? Alexander's expression grew more thoughtful. My grandmother always taught me that names have power. She said that when you name a child, you're not just giving them an identity, you're giving them a direction. Queen Elena believed that each generation should build on the work of those who came before while having the courage to forge new paths. We hope Luna Isabella Grace will do exactly that. The questions continued for a few more minutes, but Luna began to show signs of hunger, making the soft sounds that her parents had learned meant feeding time was approaching. Victoria and Alexander exchanged a look that communicated volumes, and Alexander smoothly brought the impromptu press conference to a close. Thank you all for being here today, he said. We know you understand that our daughter needs her afternoon feeding, and new parents learn quickly that babies set the schedule, not the other way around. The crowd of journalists laughed appreciatively, and several called out final congratulations as the royal couple walked back toward their waiting car. The entire public introduction had taken exactly 14 minutes, but those 14 minutes had already begun to shape Luna Isabella Grace's public identity. As they settled back into the car for the journey home, Victoria looked down at Luna, who had indeed begun to fuss for food. Well, little one, you've officially met the world. What do you think? Luna's response was a small cry that made both of her parents laugh. I think she's ready to go home, Alexander said, taking his daughter's tiny hand in his much larger one. And honestly, so am I. The car pulled away from the hospital, leaving behind the crowds and cameras and carrying the new family back to the privacy of Kensington Palace. Behind them, the journalists and photographers were already filing their stories, and, within minutes, images of Luna Isabella Grace would be appearing on newspaper websites and television screens around the world. But, inside the car, the reality was much simpler. Three people who loved each other heading home for an afternoon feeding and perhaps a nap. The public introduction was complete, but the real journey of Luna Isabella Grace's life was just beginning. Part 3. The photographs from the hospital steps had barely been transmitted around the world when the responses began pouring in. Back at Kensington Palace, Margaret and her communications team worked frantically to manage the unprecedented volume of congratulatory messages, interview requests, and media coverage that followed the announcement of Luna Isabella Grace's name. The website crashed 3 times in the first hour, Margaret reported to Alexander and Victoria as they settled into the private sitting room adjacent to the nursery. Luna was finally napping after her feeding, and her parents were taking advantage of the quiet moment to catch up on the day's developments. The Spanish Prime Minister sent a personal message saying how honored the Spanish people feel by the choice of Luna. Margaret continued, reading from a tablet that seemed to refresh with new messages every few seconds. The Italian ambassador has requested a formal meeting to discuss cultural exchange programs. And she paused, smiling. 3 different universities have already announced new scholarship programs in Luna's honor. Victoria shook her head in amazement. All of that from just announcing her name? I knew there would be interest, but this feels overwhelming. Alexander poured tea from the service that had been brought in, a small gesture of normalcy in what had become an extraordinary day. What about the public reaction? What are people actually saying? Incredibly positive, Margaret replied, swiping through screens of social media analytics. Luna is trending in 17 languages. The general sentiment is that it's a beautiful, modern choice that still respects tradition. Several royal commentators have called it inspired, and the international press is fascinated by the multicultural aspects of the name. What Margaret didn't mention, but what Alexander and Victoria would learn later, was that the name Luna Isabella Grace had sparked conversations far beyond typical royal watching circles. In Spain, young mothers were already considering Luna for their own daughters. Italian newspapers were running features about Queen Isabella's progressive policies. And, around the world, people were sharing stories about their own grandmothers named Grace, creating an unexpected sense of personal connection to the newest royal baby. There's something else, Margaret said, her tone becoming more serious. We've received 17 requests for exclusive interviews with major international networks, 6 documentary proposals, and 3 book deals. All in the last 4 hours. Victoria leaned back in her chair, suddenly, feeling exhausted. She's not even a week old, and they already want to turn her into a commodity. Which is exactly why we're going to say no to all of it, Alexander said firmly. At least for now. We've done our duty with the announcement and the photographs. Now she gets to be a baby, not a public figure. This decision, which seemed natural and protective to Luna's parents, would actually prove to be more significant than they realized. In an age where celebrity culture demanded constant access and immediate content, Alexander and Victoria's choice to step back and prioritize their daughter's privacy would set a new precedent for how royal children could be raised in the modern world. Margaret nodded approvingly. I'll issue a statement saying that you're taking time to focus on your family, and that any future public appearances will be announced through official channels. She paused, then added, though I should warn you, this will only increase the interest. The more private you are, the more valuable any glimpse of Luna becomes. Then, we'll have to be very careful about when and how we share those glimpses, Victoria replied. This can't be about what's valuable to the media. It has to be about what's right for her. That evening, as London settled into darkness around them, Alexander and Victoria found themselves in the nursery again, watching Luna sleep in her crib. The day felt surreal in retrospect, the public ceremony and media attention so different from the quiet intimacy of simply being parents. I keep thinking about what happens next, Victoria said softly, careful not to wake the baby. About how we balance giving her a normal childhood with preparing her for the role she'll eventually inherit. Alexander understood her concern completely. As third in line to the throne, Luna would grow up knowing that her future involved significant public responsibility. But, unlike previous generations of royal children, she would also grow up in an era of social media, instant global communication, and constantly evolving expectations about privacy and public service. We make it up as we go along, he said finally. We use our best judgment, we learn from our mistakes, and we always put her first. The next morning brought new challenges and new revelations about the impact of Luna's introduction to the world. The palace's mailroom reported receiving over 10,000 letters and packages in just 24 hours, everything from congratulatory notes to hand-knitted blankets to investment advice for Luna's future. Security had to be increased to handle the volume of deliveries, and a new protocol was established for processing gifts and correspondence. More significantly, requests for information about Queen Isabella had flooded libraries and historical societies across Europe. The name choice had sparked genuine interest in learning about the progressive queen who had championed women's education in the early 20th century. Several historians announced plans for new biographies, and a major museum was preparing an exhibition about royal women who had influenced social change. "It's remarkable," said Dr. Patricia Henley, a royal historian from Cambridge University, in an interview that aired on BBC News that morning. "By choosing to honor Queen Isabella, Prince Alexander and Princess Victoria have reminded us of a remarkable woman whose contributions to society were often overshadowed by more famous relatives." Luna's name is already inspiring a new generation of young women to learn about the history of female leadership. Victoria watched the interview while feeding Luna her morning bottle, struck by the unintended consequences of their private decision. "We just wanted to honor your great-great-grandmother," she whispered to Luna. "We had no idea it would inspire people to learn about history." Alexander joined them in the morning room, carrying newspapers from around the world that Margaret had collected. "Listen to this," he said, opening a copy of El País. "Spanish teenage girls are starting a social media campaign using hashtag #LunaGeneration, talking about their hopes and dreams for the future." And this is from Le Figaro. "The choice of Luna represents a new chapter in European royal families, one that embraces both tradition and modernity." The international response was unlike anything the palace had seen before. Previous royal births had certainly generated interest and celebration, but Luna's name had somehow captured imaginations in a way that transcended typical royal watching. The combination of the modern choice of Luna with the historical significance of Isabella and the universal appeal of Grace had created something special. "We're getting requests from children's book publishers who want to create stories about Luna the Moon Princess," Margaret reported during their morning briefing. "And 3 different charities focused on childhood literacy have asked to use her name for fundraising campaigns." "What do we say to those requests?" Victoria asked. She was torn between protecting Luna's privacy and recognizing the positive potential of her daughter's name to inspire good work. "We say yes to the literacy campaigns," Alexander decided after a moment's thought. "If Luna's name can help more children learn to read, that's exactly the kind of impact we hoped she might have on the world. But we make it clear that this isn't about her personally. It's about what her name represents." This decision would prove to be the first of many choices about how to handle Luna's unique position as both a private individual and a public figure. Over the coming weeks, Alexander and Victoria would develop a new approach to royal childhood, one that protected Luna's personal privacy while allowing her name and what it represented to inspire positive action. 3 days after the hospital announcement, they received a letter that touched them more deeply than all the official congratulations combined. It came from a young mother in Wales who had named her own daughter Luna after watching the royal announcement. "Your Royal Highnesses," the letter began, "I watched you introduce Luna to the world, and I was so moved by the love and hope in your voices when you explained her name. My daughter was born just 2 days later, and my husband and I decided to name her Luna as well. We want her to grow up believing that she can be a light in the darkness for others, just as you hope for your Luna. Thank you for giving us such beautiful inspiration for our daughter's future." Victoria cried when she read the letter aloud to Alexander. The idea that their choice had inspired other families, had given other children a name associated with hope and guidance, felt more meaningful than any official recognition or media coverage. "This is what matters," she said, folding the letter carefully. "Not the headlines, or the photographs, or the politics. This is about real families making decisions about their children's futures, and somehow we've been part of that." Alexander looked down at Luna, who was awake and alert in his arms, her dark blue eyes seeming to take in everything around her with remarkable focus. "Do you think she understands any of this?" he asked. "Do you think she knows that her name is already making a difference in the world?" "I think she will someday," Victoria replied. "And I think when she's old enough to understand, she'll be proud that her very first gift to the world was inspiration." As the afternoon sunlight streamed through the nursery windows, Luna Isabella Grace slept peacefully, unaware that her name had already begun to influence poetry, inspire charitable work, and give hope to families around the world. Her formal introduction to public life was complete, but her real impact was just beginning. Part 4. 2 weeks had passed since the hospital announcement, and life at Kensington Palace was beginning to find its own rhythm. Luna had grown noticeably, her features becoming more defined, and her periods of alertness longer. Victoria had recovered her strength, and Alexander had settled into the demanding but joyful routine of first-time parenthood. But the outside world continued to swirl with interest in the newest royal baby. The Children's Hospital in Manchester wants to name their new wing after Luna, Margaret reported during the weekly communications briefing. And we have 3 different requests from children's charities to use her name for their annual fundraising galas. Victoria looked up from her correspondence, where she had been reviewing letters from expectant mothers around the world asking for advice about baby names. That's wonderful about the hospital wing, but we need to be careful about how Luna's name is used commercially. She should never feel like she owes the world something because of decisions we made before she could speak for herself. This concern had been weighing on both parents as they watched the continued global fascination with their daughter. The name Luna Isabella Grace had taken on a life of its own, inspiring everything from jewelry collections to children's clothing lines. While much of the attention was positive, Victoria and Alexander were acutely aware that they were making decisions that would affect Luna's entire life. What about the documentary proposal from the BBC? Alexander asked, bouncing Luna gently as she showed signs of fussiness. They want to do a historical piece about royal names and their cultural impact. I like that idea, Victoria said thoughtfully. It's educational. It's not specifically about Luna, and it might help people understand why names matter in royal families. Plus, it could highlight Queen Isabella's work, which has been largely forgotten. Margaret made notes on her tablet. I'll tell them we're interested, but with the condition that Luna herself doesn't appear in the documentary. They can use the hospital photographs, but nothing new. This approach, supporting positive initiatives inspired by Luna's name while protecting her personal privacy, was becoming the guiding principle for how Alexander and Victoria managed their daughter's early public presence. It was a delicate balance, but one that felt authentic to their values as both parents and public figures. The real test of this approach came when they received an invitation that neither had expected. The Spanish royal family had formally invited them to Madrid for a cultural exchange ceremony celebrating the historical connections between the British and Spanish monarchies. The invitation specifically mentioned Luna, noting that her name had strengthened the bonds of friendship between our nations. It's a lovely gesture, Victoria said, reading the formal invitation over breakfast while Luna napped in her carrier beside the table. But she's only 3 weeks old. Is it fair to take her on her first international trip for a public event? Alexander studied the detailed itinerary that had accompanied the invitation. It wouldn't be a working visit for Luna. They're suggesting we bring her, but that she wouldn't participate in any of the formal ceremonies. She could stay at the residence while we attend the official functions. But the press coverage would be enormous, Victoria pointed out. Every newspaper in Europe would want photos of Luna in Spain. It could turn into a circus. They spent several days considering the invitation, weighing the diplomatic benefits against the potential cost to Luna's privacy. Finally, they decided to accept, but with strict conditions about media access and scheduling that would prioritize their daughter's routine and comfort. The decision proved to be inspired. The trip to Madrid became Luna Isabella Grace's first international success, not because of anything she did, but because of what her presence represented. The Spanish people embraced the visit with warmth that surprised even the most experienced diplomatic observers. She's sleeping through her first state dinner, Alexander whispered to Victoria as they prepared for the formal banquet at the Royal Palace of Madrid. Luna was safely settled in the private residence, cared for by her nanny and royal protection officers. But her parents couldn't help feeling nervous about leaving her for the evening. The Spanish queen said something beautiful earlier, Victoria replied, adjusting the diamond tiara that had belonged to Queen Elena. She said that Luna represents hope for the future of European cooperation, that even as politics divide nations, families can bring them together. The banquet was indeed historic, not just for the diplomatic agreements that were signed, but for the cultural exchange programs that were announced. A new scholarship fund would send British students to study Spanish history and Spanish students to study British literature. Art exhibitions would travel between the countries, and there were plans for joint archaeological expeditions to sites of mutual historical interest. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came the next morning, when the Spanish queen privately showed Victoria and Alexander a letter she had received from a young Spanish girl named Luna. "Your Majesties," the letter read in careful handwriting. "I am 8 years old, and my name is Luna too. When I heard about the English Princess Luna, I felt very proud because we have the same name. My teacher taught us about Queen Isabella and how she helped women go to school. I want to study very hard, and maybe someday help other girls learn too. Thank you for making Luna such a beautiful name for princesses." Victoria felt tears welling in her eyes as she read the letter. This was exactly what she and Alexander had hoped for when they chose their daughter's name. Not that Luna herself would feel pressure to be extraordinary, but that her name might inspire other children to dream bigger and reach higher. "May we write back to her?" Victoria asked the Spanish queen. "I would love for Luna to have a pen pal when she's old enough to write letters herself." "I think that would be wonderful," the Spanish queen replied. "In fact, we've received dozens of similar letters. Perhaps we could create a program for young Lunas from both countries to correspond with each other." The trip home to London was peaceful, with Luna sleeping contentedly through most of the flight. But when they arrived at Kensington Palace, they found an unexpected surprise waiting for them. The palace staff had prepared a small welcome home celebration, complete with flowers from the palace gardens and a cake decorated with moons and stars. "We wanted to celebrate Luna's first successful diplomatic mission," Margaret explained, though her smile suggested the real reason was that everyone had simply missed the baby during her 4-day absence. That evening, as they settled back into their familiar routines, Victoria and Alexander reflected on how much had changed in just a month since Luna's birth. Their daughter had become more than just their child. She had become a symbol of hope, connection, and possibility that resonated far beyond anything they had imagined. "I've been thinking about something the Spanish queen said," Alexander told Victoria as they watched Luna's evening feeding. "She said that royal children don't choose to be born into history, but they can choose what kind of history they make." "Luna's already making history," Victoria replied softly. "She's inspiring children to learn, bringing countries together, and making people believe in the possibility of positive change. And she hasn't even smiled her first real smile yet." As if responding to her mother's voice, Luna's eyes opened and focused on Victoria's face. And then, for just a moment, the corners of her mouth turned upward in what could have been gas, or could have been something more magical. "Did you see that?" Alexander whispered. "I think she just smiled at you." "I think she did too," Victoria whispered back, her heart full of love and wonder and hope for all the beautiful possibilities that lay ahead for their remarkable little daughter. Outside the nursery windows, London sparkled in the evening light, and somewhere in the distance, church bells were ringing the hour. Luna Isabella Grace was home, safe and loved, already changing the world simply by being exactly who she was meant to be. Part 5. 6 weeks had passed since Luna Isabella Grace first met the world on the steps of St. Mary's Hospital, and the impact of that simple introduction continued to ripple outward in ways that surprised even the most seasoned royal observers. What had begun as a traditional royal birth announcement had evolved into something much more significant, a new model for how royal families could engage with the modern world while protecting their children's privacy and dignity. The morning sunshine streamed through the windows of the Kensington Palace nursery as Victoria sat in the rocking chair, feeding Luna her breakfast bottle. At 6 weeks old, Luna had developed a personality that delighted her parents daily. She was in the heart of London, where centuries of tradition meet the modern world. A simple announcement was about to change everything. Behind the golden gates of the palace, Prince Alexander and Princess Victoria held their breath as they prepared to introduce their daughter to the world. But this wasn't just any royal birth announcement. Hidden within the carefully chosen name lay a message that would bridge two worlds, honor the past, and shape the future of the monarchy itself. What they were about to reveal would surprise even the most seasoned royal watchers and touch the hearts of millions across the globe.